Salim, as the events unfold regarding the downing of Flight 752, the Ukrainian plane carrying many Canadians in Iran, we now know, it has been confirmed, that it was taken down by the Iranian regime. They claim, of course, that it was an accident, but they are liars, they are deceitful, they have no integrity or honor, they have lied in the past, they are a disreputable gang of thugs, and we know that it was not an accident. No one does not accidentally shoot down a plane. A passenger plane at 7,000 feet, anybody can discern it to be what it is, even on the ground as a civilian. We know what a 737 looks like in the air at 7,000 feet. It had just taken off from Tehran airport. So it was no accident. It was absolutely deliberate. And the question now is, how should Canada react? Salim?
Yes, Robert. I mean, when we last spoke about this matter, things were very sketchy at that time, but we still felt that that the Iranians were possibly responsible for it. The Iranians first denied it. That is, the government of Iran came out, and the foreign minister Javad Zarif denying that it had anything to do with Iran had anything to do with the downing of or the crash of the Ukrainian airline. With now we know there were 57 Canadians of Iranian origin on board, returning home to Canada, who all died in that accident, in that crash. But subsequently now they have basically admitted that, yes, it was brought down by a mistaken firing of their air defense missile that was being, at that time, the air defense soldiers were on alert and firing away. And that brought down the plane. There are a whole lot of questions that needs to be answered, and I hope the Canadian government, at least to the extent that we now know that the Prime Minister has indicated that he's demanding answers, and that he will continue to demand answers, not only Canada alone, but Canada in conjunction with the other countries who have had casualties on this. The Ukrainians are the lead. It was their plane that was brought down. It was as far as we know, or we have read in the public domain, that it was a pretty new plane. It was about 3 years old, and it had just gone through its checking out of the plane. So there was no fault on the side of the aircraft. It was directly an act of war in that sense, or more precisely, a terrorist act, a state-sponsored terrorist act. Iran is the largest state-sponsored terrorist today in the world. We also saw, and we will wait to see further, the Iranian government said that it would not be releasing the black box. And we have to see whether there will be enough pressure brought upon them to hand over the black box to the international authorities, or to the Ukrainian government, since the plane belonged to the Ukrainian airline. And then we will know even with greater certainty what happened, and how did the crew in the cockpit dealt with the situation before the plane crashed. My immediate thought, Robert, was, as these news are all unfolding and breaking, was a line right out of Shakespeare: "The evil that men do lives after them." That means with Omar Soleimani dead, President Trump having taken him out on Thursday, June the 3rd, Baghdad time in the afternoon, the fingerprint of Omar or Soleimani is all over the place. The Iranians started firing 15 missiles at Iraq on the night that the plane was brought down, or in the afternoon that the plane was brought down Iranian time. An immediate question is, why did the Iranian government allow passenger planes to take off from Iranian airport during that window of operation when the Iranian military was firing missiles across over to Iraq in retaliation of the killing of Soleimani. We also now know that those missiles were basically a kabuki theater. I mean, that was fired more for the domestic reasons to show that the Iranian government has not been intimidated as a result of the taking out of Soleimani, and so they were fired. But on the other side, there was no casualties, there was no damage done, no American lives were lost. And as President Trump had warned Iran that if there would be any loss of American life or American casualty, then Iranian would be dealt with even more severe response. And so that was a kabuki theater. And the question remains, why did the Iranian government that controls the air traffic over Iranian airspace allow a plane to take off while this sort of activity was taking place?
Well, that's why I'm suggesting, Salim, that it was an absolute deliberate act. They definitely let these planes take off, or that plane take off, in order to shoot it down. Otherwise, you would have stopped the air traffic. That only makes perfect sense. It certainly, if it's not cut and dried, it certainly lends credence to the theory that it was absolutely deliberate.
Yeah, I mean, if there is some degree of ambiguity, Robert, between the word deliberate and the circumstance, the context within which the plane was brought down, that means there was a military action taking place. That means that the Iranian government and the Iranian authority, the military authority, the airport authorities, the air missile soldiers, air defense soldiers who were on alert or who were making their, who were firing the missiles, were all operating under a central command, that is the command of the Iranian authorities. And so allowing the Ukrainian airline to take off was, in that sense, if not deliberate, a demonstration of total incompetence on the part of the
Or callousness, yes.
Oh.
Incompetence or callousness or disregard. It could also be taken as an indication that this kind of activity in Iran is normal. The fact that they fire missiles, foment dissent, foment terrorism, commit murders against their own people and others on a daily basis, this is situation normal. So perhaps they didn't think that this warranted a cessation of passenger traffic because they're so callous with individual lives.
You're very right. That's where I was heading. That incompetence and callousness, which is part of the whole mental makeup of these people, it was demonstrated in the bringing down of this plane. They are not technologically smart, irrespective of what they claim or what is being claimed on their part. And it is not only Iran. I mean, remember, I want to come back. This is the third world country. Their institutions are handling very advanced weapon systems in this case, or advanced technology in general, but they do not have the training, they do not have the competence to handle them in a manner that we would expect these things should be handled. And accidents of this nature are bound to happen, and that's what happened. And Iran is not the...
Are you calling it an accident?
No, I mean accident as a result of incompetence and callousness, even if there is no war situation. In this case, there was a war situation, a conflict going on. But in general, and I was driving out that these sort of things in the third world do regularly happen because of the lack of training and competence on the part of the people who are handling these highly sophisticated technological weapons, transportation, and so on. Uh, Remember, it was only a few years ago. The exact date, the year just escapes me. It was 2015 or 2014. Um, that is quite recently. The Ukrainians brought down a Malaysian airline flying over Ukraine airspace, a wide-bodied plane that was shot down, which turned out to be by Ukrainian militia that was engaged, or again, the claim is that they were engaged with the Russian. I mean, Ukraine is a war zone between Russia and Ukraine and the separatist movement inside Ukraine. So in that complex situation, the Malaysian airline plane flying over an Airbus flying in the over Ukraine from somewhere in Europe to Malaysia was brought down, and a couple of hundred lives were lost. So what we see is weapons in the hands of people who are either jittery, who are either trigger happy, and at the first sign of some sort of what they consider danger to themselves, they are ready to fire whatever they have on hand. And in this case, high-flying, heat-seeking missiles that got targeted to bring down, in the case of Ukraine, a Malaysian airline, a wide-body plane. In the case of Iran, a Ukrainian 737.
Now, Salim, under the Harper government in Canada, he severed all diplomatic relations with Iran for their involvement with the Assad regime in Syria, supporting ISIS and the terrorism abroad. He imposed a trade embargo on Iran. Now, with the Trudeau government, we've seen an opening up of trade relationships with that theocracy. And under Harper, there was actually a travel advisory to all Canadians, don't go to this country. Under Trudeau, we see normal flights in and out of that country by civilians. Does Trudeau harbor any blame, or should any blame be put on Trudeau and his government for the losses of these Canadian lives by not giving them the proper warning, by letting them think that everything is okay between our two nations and they can fly back and forth without any danger? Does he bear any blame?
Well, I'm hesitant to now go in the direction of pointing blames at this moment. I mean, the situation is very raw. Canadians have lost fellow citizens, 57 of them, young children, young people, people of different age groups, men and women. In this case, I imagine people who were traveling to Iran and then were on the way back from Iran over this holiday season.
Perhaps blame is the wrong word. Maybe some sort of responsibility, because it is the responsibility of the Canadian government to protect its citizens in situations like this. So I retract the word blame and let's use the word responsibility. Obviously, the blame lands squarely on the Iranian regime.
Responsibility, yes, to some extent, because that leads on to the larger context of what has been Justin Trudeau and his Liberal Party's position vis-a-vis Iran or vis-a-vis that part of the world. And that would lead us to explore and examine the attitude of the government in terms of foreign policy, and in terms of not only foreign policy directed towards Iran and the region, that is the Gulf states, but in general. We're back again to the question of the United Nations, and that opens up the whole box of our foreign policy situation. But again, just to back up, you're very right about the Harper government, but what the Harper government was doing was carrying on. We do not have, and I think you and I have checked this out, we do not have a diplomatic relationship in the sense that we do not have a Canadian ambassador in Tehran, and the Iranians don't have an ambassador or an embassy in that sense operating out of Ottawa. But I think there are consular services, and I'm not quite sure on one.
I don't believe so, Salim. I think they deal with us through the Pakistani embassy in the United States, if I'm not mistaken, and or Switzerland and things like that. But I don't think there's any diplomatic relations so far.
So the Iranian relationship for consular purposes of Canadians of Iranian origin needing to have some sort of a way to contact their people back in Iran, some other government is taking place, and as you are indicating, it is the Pakistani embassy that possibly is handling the Iranian file. We go back to 1979. It was Prime Minister Joe Clark at that time, the short period that he was the Prime Minister when the hostage crisis took place with the seizure of the American embassy, that the Canadian embassy and the Canadian ambassador at that time in Tehran helped 8 American diplomats to be smuggled out of Tehran. And with the smuggling out of those 8 American diplomats, the embassy was closed and it hasn't been reopened. So in that sense, maybe we do not have any direct pressure. But I'm holding a letter here in my hand that I just got from this wonderful woman, a Canadian of Iranian origin, who I know in person. Her name is Arjuman Homa. I think I sent that letter to you just before we went on air.
Yes, I've read it. Yeah.
Yeah. So she is part of this coalition of Canadian of Iranian origin and the Iranian diaspora in the Western world, calling upon all governments in the West to bring pressure upon their own governments to close down all relationship with Iran, that is to shut down all Iranian embassies wherever they are in the Western world. So that would mean basically the European governments, I think France, Germany, these are the governments that do have.
That would make perfect sense, Salim. If you consider the history of Iran and embassies, they allowed the attack of the American embassy in '79. They allowed protesters to attack and invade the British embassy. With Soleimani, they just invaded the American embassy in Iraq. Nobody should be dealing with these people whatsoever. They should be shunned and ostracized and contained.
100%. That's been my view all along, going all the way back to 9/11. Talking about the British, I mean, only a couple of days ago, the British ambassador was arrested in Tehran and then subsequently released because he was taking pictures, either he himself or some people in the British embassy who were taking pictures of the demonstration taking place in Tehran. I mean, we are not getting as much news outside of Iran because it's a highly controlled, it's a totalitarian regime, and the news is just seeping out, but we're not getting as for instance from Hong Kong, we were watching the demonstration in Hong Kong that had been taking place in recent times. That the Iranian public has been demonstrating, has been opposing this regime for a very long time. It's not only recently, but in recent months, these have escalated. I mean, this was the 40th year of the Iranian regime, and these are escalating. I mean, it's getting stronger and deeper and wider. The demonstration in the month of November, there were demonstrations right across Iran in all of the Iranian cities. Something like 5,000 Iranians were arrested by the regime, and over 1,500 Iranians were shot and killed under order of Qasem Soleimani and his Quds Force soldiers. So Iranians are defying this heavy-handed, absolutely brutal repression that has been taking place. And what we should be doing, what the West should be doing collectively, that is all the governments of the Western countries, but in particular the NATO countries, as members of the North American Treaty Organization and Alliance, and Canada is one of the founding members, we should be doing is tightening up and joining President Trump and the Americans in tightening up the sanctions and the embargoes on Iran, no trade, in fact, shutting down everything to do with Iran till the Iranian regime is brought down, is collapsed, and there is a regime change, not by Americans or NATO forces doing what happened in Libya, you know, from the outside, but from the inside, and then let the Iranian people reestablish their own regime according to their own values and their own interests and so on and so forth. That's what we should be doing. I should add to that a corollary. Our government should be sending out a clear message. This is a moment that we are going to go forward and achieve full independence of our own energy needs in terms of fossil fuel, you know, remove all the restrictions that this government has artificially placed on the basis of this bogus climate change argument and the bogus Paris Accord that this government, Justin Trudeau, has bought into. Scrap that, open up, build the pipelines, and make it absolutely clear that Canada, just as the United States is now under President Trump, will have no dependency on oil coming from the Gulf, and in particular, Iranian oil. And we will be self-sufficient, and with the Americans, in fact, we will become a net exporter of fossil fuel. That should be a clear message that will deter it. So that will feed into this whole argument that I have basically written and talked about, as I said, since 9/11. What was required, what was needed is a policy of containment that happened after the end of Second World War, when the Western European governments led by the United States brought down a policy of containing the Soviet Union, the policy of containment that eventually led to the collapse of the Soviet Union. We should not have been in any way bargaining, negotiating, trading, or showing any sort of flexibility to accommodate and appease Iran since 1979. I mean, that was an act of war that had begun by the hostage-taking and seizure of the American embassy. And in that sense, I think, you know, our responsibility has been one of, or lack of responsibility has been one of trying to accommodate and appease a renegade regime like the Iranian regime or the North Korean regime, who should be completely marginalized and be told that, you know, you have no place in a civilized world. You know, we are not going to have any conversation, any dialogue, any truck or trade with you guys. We will leave you alone, and we'll see that, you know, you wither and die. Your regimes wither and die, and that should be our position. And I think after this incident that has happened, that policy should be not debatable. I mean, the question should be, what will be the means by which we bring about that situation? There's the flip side of it, you know. I mean, and this Ukrainian situation has brought this about. The left across the Western world, the Democrats and the others further left of the Democrats in the United States, the left in Canada, which is the Liberal Party, the NDP, the Green, and all of them. And I would say including in some sense the Conservative Party, and in Europe, immediately came out after the taking out of Qasem Soleimani on Thursday, June the 3rd, by President Trump, on President Trump's order, that this is going to be an escalation, this is going to be World War III, and they have continued, despite what has happened with the bringing down of the Ukrainian airline, saying that all of this is a result of President Trump's decision. I have on hand, for instance, John Kerry, former senator and former Secretary of State under Obama, his op-ed from 2 days ago in New York Times, where he runs through the talking point of the left, that is the Democratic Party, all those Democrats who are running now for the nomination for the Democratic Party in the 2020 election, that the situation came about because of President Trump, that he is the one who is responsible. Instead of recognizing, and we have to be very clear about this, and Canada has not been, Justin Trudeau has not been, that it was the 8 years of appeasement and accommodation that emboldened the Iranians, starting with the Iran deal. And worst of all, that all of these negotiation and deal making with Iran took place within the rubric or within the organizational setup of the United Nations. I'll read you here a passage from John Kerry about this matter, the way the former Secretary of State phrases this situation, and I'll come back to what it means. He says, 2 years later, that is 2 years after Obama opened the negotiation, that is, John Kerry was given the responsibility to open the negotiation in a face-to-face discussion with the Iranian leadership and meeting his counterpart, the Iranian foreign minister. He said that was in 2013. So 2015, 2 years later, after intense negotiation, we had an agreement that would be signed by 7 nations and endorsed by the United Nations Security Council. Diplomacy had achieved what sanctions alone had not. Iran couldn't have a nuclear weapon during the lifespan of the agreement, and if it cheated, the world was resolved to stop it. This is the key paragraph in his op-ed and the talking point, that the United States, by making a deal with Iran, was bringing Iran into the civilized community of nations. By appeasing and accommodating, Iran was going to become a normal actor, as if, you get a man-eating tiger become, in a sense, non-man-eating tiger by simply adopting the man-eating tiger as a pet.
So, in other words, what you're saying, if I could paraphrase, is that John Kerry and the left have absolutely no understanding of the mentality and the nature of the beast that they're dealing with. You cannot have diplomacy with a brutal, mindless machine of death.
100%. Not only a lack of understanding or complete, in a sense, ignoring the actual situation, but also a total lack of understanding of history. Neville Chamberlain in 1938, going and negotiating, that whole decade of 1930s of trying to, after Hitler came to power in 1933, trying to appease and accommodate the Third Reich, and Hitler held up that famous paper in his hand in 1938.
Peace in our time.
Peace in our time. And it was only a matter of less than a year that World War II broke out. Yeah. And people like Winston Churchill was pointing that out over and over and over again. And so there you have it. But the worst thing is, as he's pointing out, the 7 countries of the United Nations. These 7 countries are the countries charged with keeping peace and security. They are the permanent members of the Security Council. They have the heavy responsibility. I mean, if the United Nations means anything, it means about maintaining peace and security and punishing those countries that abrogate or violate the Security Council resolution or the UN Charter on the issue of peace and security. The United Nations is not about Paris Accord and so on and so forth. You know, this is all evolved over time. So there you have the 5 members of the Security Council. I mean, 2 of the members of the Security Council have values that are not the values of a liberal democracy, Russia and China. But they are, this is the World War II alliance. But there you have Britain, France, Germany was added to it, and the European Union. And that's where it is. The Western government, over the past 8 years in particular, which was the Obama administration, went around finding whatever they could, in whatever manner they could, while Iranians held tough in the terms of their own interest. That means they want to acquire nuclear weapon. And why do they want to acquire nuclear weapons? So that they
to destroy Israel.
Will be, yeah, to deter anybody else to take them out, to take action against them, and to blackmail other countries. That's exactly what North Korea is doing. That's exactly what, in a sense, you know, the Pakistanis have been doing in their relationship with India or anybody that might want to challenge Pakistan. And that's exactly what the Iranians want. And that would lead to nuclear proliferation in the Gulf area, where, you know, given with our situation and domestic situation with our decision on nuclear fossil fuel resources that we have declined to build it up, we would be, and we would continue to be, dependent upon oil from and energy from the Persian Gulf area, where once Iran gets the nuclear weapon, Saudi Arabia will seek it, Turkey will seek it, Egypt will seek it, and there we have it. You know, we will be in a far more dangerous situation in terms of conflict, not only within the region, but being exported outside. So the talking point for the last little while has been and continues to be that this situation that came about, with ultimately culminating in the bringing down and shooting down of Ukrainian airline, goes back to President Trump. His responsibility, that he escalated the situation by taking out the second in command military general, as if the second in command military general of a state sponsoring, terrorist sponsoring state, Iran, is the same as taking out, for instance, or equating Qasem Soleimani with General Patton or General Douglas MacArthur or General Eisenhower, you know, the sheer absurdity of it. But this is the mindset of the left. And it goes even further back, and you and I have talked about it, that the first immediate reflexive action is to blame ourselves for the problem that is, the source of it is the countries like Iran, that no, we are responsible. We have created the situation. And there is John Kerry, there is the Democratic Party in the United States, and in Canada. I mean, let's hope that this event will put some steel in the spine of Justin Trudeau. I have my doubts, but it will. But you have people like the NDP leader, Jagmeet Singh. His response was immediately after Qasem Soleimani came out that the Americans had escalated it. The Americans were on the wrong, and we saw NDP members of parliament joining those people, the left in Canada, along with those Iranians who still maintain the view that Iran is the victim of the Western powers, in particular the United States, having demonstration right across Canada, as you know, on the night of the news that Soleimani came out, denouncing United States, and you had NDP members of parliament joining those demonstrations to denounce it. And Jagmeet Singh, who's a Canadian like me of Indian origin, has, to my knowledge, not been categorical, unambiguous, and very clear in not only denouncing it, but having no truck or trade with those elements of the Sikh population in Canada who were responsible for or who were directly involved with the Sikh Khalistanis who brought down, that was a terrorist act that brought down Air India plane in 1985, 35 years ago, which was the worst terrorist act prior to 9/11.
Could we call them perhaps at least unwitting fifth columnists, these people in Parliament who support our enemies?
Yeah, I would call them fifth columnists because they have continued to play a double game. They have continued to be appeasement minded, and they have continued to be. Look, it's not only Jagmeet Singh. We saw that with Justin Trudeau traveling to India, and in his entourage was a Sikh Canadian or a Canadian of Sikh origin who had been indicted for the attempted murder of a visiting Indian cabinet minister. And these people, in this case, this particular person and the association of this particular person from British Columbia, the Sikh Canadian, with the people who were involved in bringing down the Air India 747, Boeing 747. I mean, we know them. We know who they are. We know their politics. The Indian government has pointed this out. They're organized over here, and they're operating out of here because they support the breakup of India. They support the formation of a Sikh state in India. And here it is. India is a Commonwealth country. India is a democracy. And this is our position. And we haven't called them out. Our media hasn't called them out. And then you have, the Muslim Brotherhood organization over here. We have people in the Canadian Parliament who are complicit with or supporters or apologists of the Muslim Brotherhood that number of Muslim majority countries such as Egypt, such as the United Arab Emirates, such as Bangladesh, have declared to be terrorist organization, and we know they are operating right out of here in Canada. They have infiltrated our society. We have had a number of terrorist actions in Canada, that has taken place, including the attempted, what's the word for it, penetration, an assault on the Canadian Parliament a few years ago by a lone terrorist operative with a Muslim Brotherhood or jihadi or Islamist tendencies. So I think, this is well past the time, Robert, that the Canadian people woke up and demanded a house cleaning in Canada and demanded stiffer action and stiffer response to such rogue states as the Iranian state under the mullahs.
Thank you very much, Salim.
Thank you.